Sewa Sewa Guego in Mohawk. Estgar Hrofeceastre, Youngats, Society for Creative Anachronism, Ian Stewart, Youngats, mundanely. So I'm Estgar Hrofeceastre in the Society. So this class is Karihwatehkwen, Kaianerkó, which is the words before all else and the great law of peace. Now, these are two core pieces of Haudenosaunee or Haudenosaunee culture. And we're just going to sort of go through it. Now I'll say the Ohandun is done every beginning of classes, beginning of meetings, beginning of any longhouse ceremony. And you can go and you can hear the Ohandun one day and hear it that same day in the night, and it's a different Ohandun because it's it was described to me as you get a group of people and one person describes a rose and then another person describes that same rose. They're not going to use the same language. But there are certain things that we hit in the Ohandun, and we'll go into that. So I'm gonna do a shortened version of the Ohandun Karihwatehkwen just to kind of get your minds around it. And one of the things that is actually in it is each line is you'll hear the line Agwego onska neji and nikontate'ken ne ononhkwa'shon tánon waradne. So which is let us bring all of our minds together and give thanks and pay respect to. And that's what this is. That's what the Ohandun Karihwatehkwen is a way to bring all your minds together to get on the same page and to honor the gifts of creation. These are the things that the Creator laid out for us. And so we thank each of them. So, Sewadoncios Njokwa, Kaianerkó, ne Ohandun Karihwatehkwen, ne Gonowera Donsera. Agwego onska neji, and Iroquois ne ononhkwa'shon, tánon waradne atani ononhkwa'shon. And you'll hear that at the end of each passage. Atani ononhkwa'shon. Now, if you were Kanien'kehá speakers, the response to that is to or wahi. So like to is the formalized response, and it's I agree. So Agwego onska neji and Iroquois ne ononhkwa'shon no deity waradne yeti ni stahancha yukunjare atani ononhkwa'shon. Agwego onska neji and Iroquois ne ononhkwa'shon no deity waradne odera su'a atani ononhkwa'shon. Agwego onska neji and Iroquois ne ononhkwa'shon no deity waradne oneka su'a atani ononhkwa'shon. Deity waradne onwe. Let's see, we'll just shorten it out. Because it'll take 5 or 6 minutes if I do it the full formal. Deity waradne ohonde su'a atani ononhkwa'shon. Deity waradne odera su'a atani ononhkwa'shon. Deity waradne ononhkwa'shon atani ononhkwa'shon. Deity waradne ononhkwa'shon. Deity waradne gahi su'a. Deity waradne ojideo su'a. Deity waradne gondirio. Deity waradne johekwa. Deity waradne ojideo gu'a. Deity waradne grondo su'a tano ogwire su'a. Deity waradne gayeri nigrawage. Deity waradne radiwiras. Deity waradne jojanekarakwa. Deity waradne ahsen. Deity waradne Oji stokwa su'a. Detsi do wa nu warad ne songwaya dison. Anthony Dohafni Gora Tohni Wanage. So that was like the super condensed version. Now, basically, each line is thanking some being, some part of creation. So you start out with Deotenu Waradne Ongwe Su'a. Now you hear Su'a a lot, and that means all. That is the conjoiner for all. So Ongwe Su'a is all of the people. And we're, like you can think of it as like all of us here in class, or you can think of it as all of the people here on Turtle Island, or all the people in creation. Like we are greeting and paying respects to all of the people. And that's where we start. And then the next line, is our mother, the earth. So we start by thanking and greeting each other, and then we thank the earth. And this is where it starts. If you start by looking around you at the people, and then you look down to the earth, and then it's Onekasu'a, all of the waters, the rivers, the lakes, the oceans, the waters. Gunjun Su'a, so the fishes. Ohonde Su'a is all of the green things, all the plants. But then it gets broken down into Odera Su'a, the roots. ononhkwa'shon, the medicine plants. Johekwa. Now, Johekwa is literally they who sustain us. And when Kanien'kehá, when Mohawk speak of Johekwa, really we're talking about three things. We're talking about oneste, which is corn. We're talking about osaheda, which is beans. And we're talking about ononhkwa'shon, which is squash, the three sisters. So the three sisters are Junhekwa. And that's pretty, like, that three sisters style of growing pretty common across all of Turtle Island. From Johekwa, we go to Ga'isu'a, the berries. And then from there, it's Ojinu'asu'a, which is all of the insect life. So we've started at the waters, now we've gone to the ground, now we're moving up. Then it's Gorondo Su'a, ononhkwa'shon. So, and this is where one of those interesting linguistic things, Gorondo means tree in Oswegan, but in Ganawage, it means timber, like log. And Ogwiri Su'a in Oswegan means bush, but Ogwire in Ganawage means tree. So in theory, we're thanking the trees and the bushes. We could also be thanking the logs and the trees, depending on your dialect. But we're thanking the woody things. From there, we go to Gondirio, which are all of the free animals. Not the captured animals, the free animals. The deer, the beaver. And then it's Ononhkwa'shon, which are all the birds. And from there, it's Kaianerkó, which are the four winds. And each wind has its name and means a different thing. From there, it's Rariwiras, the thunder beings. Our grandfather, the thunderers. When they come, they're bringing rain. They're welcome. From there, it's our older brother, the sun. And then grandmother moon. Ahsen Taneka. So Jojaneka, or older brother, the sun. Ahsen Taneka, the moon. Grandmother moon. Ojistokwa'shon, the stars in the sky. And then the last line is Songwaya Dison, who is the creator. So if you think about it sort of formulaically, you start by looking around you, seeing the people, and then you look down and you thank everything at your feet. And then you move your eyes up for the plants, the trees, the birds, the air, the sun and the moon, the stars, the creator. And that is the structure. That is the basic structure of the Kaianerkó. And every time you hear it, people will throw in different things. And there's actually, so in Longhouse, we divide into clans. So 3 clans in the Mohawk: bear, turtle, wolf. The clans will sit on different sides in the Longhouse. One clan, will designate someone for doing the Ohen'kwa, and they'll get up and they'll do it. And the other clans can then respond with, you left this out. Because there's a line in it, which I didn't do because I was doing the shortened version, which basically translates to, I have done my best at fulfilling the responsibility, and if I've forgotten anything, you can give your own Thanksgiving. Like, if I've dropped something, this is your chance to fill it. So they'll kick it over to one of the other clans, and then they get up and they're like, well, you didn't talk about the birch trees. So they'll start talking about birch trees. And then they'll kick it back to the original speaker, and if everyone thinks, okay, that's it, we're cool, they'll say, all right, we're good at the Kanien'kehá, it's done. Or they'll say, you know what? I forgot about blueberries. So like the Ohen'kwa can actually take sometimes 2 or 3 hours if people are getting really verbose and really into it. But these days, especially if you're like in your Zoom Sarage, you're in Zoom, you try and keep it short. And it's funny, they'll beginning of class, I just finished 2.5 week intensive language class. Beginning and end of every class, we did the Ohen'kwa, and it was like, anyone want to volunteer? And you could jump in, and nobody ever said, hey, you forgot. There really is, like, there's no right way, there's a structure, but nobody's going to get on you for forgetting something. And you can actually, even if you're just having a bad day and get up there and you're like, I can't remember anything, you can just Tony Ohen'kwa, like, that's it, I'm done. That's all my words. And then someone can come up and fill in the gaps. But if you think about it as a cultural framework, right? These are all the things that the Creator has given us. We refer to ourselves as the younger brothers. We were the last people here. We believe that actually the ononhkwa'shon, the original people, the natives, were the last people that the Creator put on Earth. That we were the last people placed here, and given to Turtle Island, and here it is, and live in balance. It's all about balance. And the only thing we're asked, right, is take a couple moments out of the day and thank the Creator. It's not a big ask. So that's sort of the beginnings. I'm going to open it up to questions, because I find that when we're discussing this, questions sometimes lead the conversation in places it wouldn't go if it were just me. So if anybody's got a question, now would be the time to ask. Or am I just going to have to lecture? I think I'm going to have to lecture. Damn it.
I have one quick question.
Yep.
As part of when you're saying when you're giving thanks and you have again within part of the cultural framework and people get up and finish it, does it become a bit of one-upsmanship, or is it just more of how does that fit into the framework of just trying to be more inclusive, or is it a little bit competitive? I'm just curious.
It's not really competitive. I mean, it can be, but really, like the competitive stuff's supposed to stay out on the lacrosse field, right? But you know, it's a bunch of people getting together, and that's where it gets interesting, isn't it? Like that's. But I mean, it's supposed to be, right? You're hitting the points of creation. So you know, it's not so competitive because remember there's actually no language traditionally, and there's no word in the language for please. It's a longhouse culture. Literally, you've got families living together in the same house, the same longhouse. Traditionally broken up into clan villages. So when you're doing this, like if you're getting together, it might be at Grand Council, it might get a little clan on clan to see which clan can do it best. But if you're doing it in the morning and at lunch when you're done, and in the, you know, and then after lunch, and then in the evening, everybody gets a chance. And that's why sometimes it turns into this like really lengthy, flowery thing, is like, oh yeah, you know, like Rohahio this morning, like he included the maple trees and the strawberries. So I'm gonna include those today, but then I'm also gonna add in like the deer and the eagle. So it kind of becomes a building framework. I mean, it can be seen as competitive, but it's also a sort of, it is a cooperative social construct that builds on itself. So by the time you're done, you know, 2 or 3 days of council, you can get it to be fairly lengthy. Was that a question coming? Somebody unmuted. Nope. So Benedict, does that kind of answer your question?
It sure does. I was just thinking it was something on, you know, like, well, again, if you know you're kind of giving thanks, and I was used to sort of a similar Viking thing, but you know, again, part of the time when you were giving thanks, there was always this slight edge of competitiveness, and I was just kind of curious if this, you know, how that fed into it. You know, I figured it probably wasn't a big deal, but maybe just you know, what, much like you said, it's part of the framework, and you add to it, people build off of it, hopefully cooperatively.
Yeah, I mean, it's designed to be cooperatively, but then again, the entirety of the way Longhouse functions through Kaianerkó is like everything is cooperative. And we'll get into that when we get into Kaianerkó, but like everything is talked out. And there are going to be times where like not everybody's going to be happy, and there are going to be issues that you're not going to be able to resolve, but you got to walk away from it. But in the Ohandun, like that's the place, like that's supposed to be the easy thing. That's supposed to be the thing that actually brings everybody's mind together. Like these are all things we can agree on. Like we can agree that grass is awesome, and that birds are awesome, and trees and water. Like these are all the things. So, you know, I mean, I've seen it sort of be competitive, but usually it's not so much. Are there other questions before I go in and do more? Monique, do you have a question? I see a hand.
Yeah, Estgar.
Yeah.
How in the structure of history, where does this start to unfold into the tradition of the people?
So in our tradition, this was given by the creator. This is something that is like the 4 ceremonies or the Kaianerkó This is something that is culturally inculcated within the Haudenosaunee from the beginning. So as far as we know, we've always had it.
Sure. Okay. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. And that's the interesting thing about oral tradition, right? I'm sure academics would argue that it probably comes in later, but as far as our tradition is, it was given to us by the Creator as the only real responsibility we have, besides for living in balance with nature, is giving daily thanks.
I have a follow-up question.
Shoot.
How frequently, if at all, do more modern things get enfolded into this? Like, for example, you mentioned that there's now a Mohawk term for Zoom, and this is now a place where people can gather. Like, are there other pieces of modernity that work their way into this?
That would be a big, as far as I've never seen anyone thank anything modern in the Ohen and Karihwatehkwen. As a matter of fact, it is a place where we point out what is important, right? The natural world is important. The Zoom, while helpful, is not something that I think will get its place in the Ohen and Karihwatehkwen. Because it's not something that we focus on. Like, it's, there's no money. Nobody thanks money or jobs or, you don't even thank your, having good health. Is not, these are just the things you're thanking. I mean, it's an interesting thought. And I'll be interested to see if it changes over the time. Like Zoom Tarage, that I'm on Zoom is a brand new thing. So I'll be interested to see if 20 years the Ohen and Karihwatehkwen has picked up. I'm thankful for something modern, but I can't see culturally us embracing that.
Thank you.
At least not in the framework of the Ohandu. I've been in plenty of Zoom meetings where we've all been sort of thankful for having this technology, but it's not spelled out in the Ohandu. So I'm going to show what this looks like. As long as I can. So I'll be sharing this. If people want to put their emails in the chat, I'll be emailing this to people. And I'll probably also send it to Isma to just have her put up on the event website. But you can sort of see how it's structured. So we'll get down to Ohondesu ahera. Luego onska neji indira wakwe nuni ne angwani gora dahno deote nuwaradne. Ohondesu dahno nene agwa. Takan wakwe Kwan Marigawana ne Johekwa, Nene Honeste Osaheda Dahno, Ona Onsera at the Mohawk Yangwani Gora. So here in this version, Ohonde Su'a, the green growing things, they go a step further and they say chief among them, Junhekwa. And then they list Honeste, Ona Osaheda, and Ona Onsora. So that's how you can fancy it up. But for just bare bones, Where is it? Wow. I have too many things open. Technology is not my friend. I apologize. So here you can see, this is a much smaller version, right? This is the bare bones. If you want to learn this, right? If you want to learn the Karihwatehkwen, this is a good version to learn, because it really, it hits all the points without being complicated, and then you can build from that. So, you know, here we have Deite Nuwaradne. So we gather, we greet, we pay respects, we thank. ononhkwa'shon, the people. Yeti nistaha chiyuhunjare, Mother Earth. ononhkwa'shon. So if anyone's actually interested, right, this is the version I will also send out. If you want to learn this, I won't get into the language because that could be an entirely different class. But if people actually want to learn this, I can do a recording and send it to you. Yeah, this is the simplest framework right here. So it really, when you think about what we culturally honor, it's right there. One of the hard things, right, is the difference between the settler mindset and the native mindset. You know, and that really is sort of just based on how the thinking is. Like, you know, the Ohandun and our creation story and everything tells us that we're related. Everything has a life force. Oh, that's a fabulous question. So Tom Porter, who is the chief of Ganatohalege, he's Bear Clan chief. So I'm Bear Clan as well. He's done a version of the Karihwatehkwen and has had it translated into Spanish and French and Italian. His belief is that the more people who know this, the more people who begin to think like this, the better it'll be, right? So that's the great thing about the Kaianerkó is when the Peacemaker came and the Kaianerkó was given, that wasn't an end deal. That wasn't okay, here it is. These are the 5 nations, because we know, right? It's now 6 nations. So if you wanted to just do it in English, take time during the day to do it in English, that's totally acceptable. That's you just honoring creation. And that's not cultural appropriation, right? You know, the only people who are going to learn Kanien'kehá are people who are, you know, who either related to Kanien'kehá, Kanien'kehá, or, you know, maybe one of the other, you know, one of the other nations within the Haudenosaunee, because like ononhkwa'shon, Oneida is really close to Mohawk. So, but yeah, no, you can learn this and do it in English, and that's that's actually encouraged. Like, I would encourage you to go out and just think about this. Think about it. And actually, so I'd known the Thanksgiving address for years, but I'd known about it in English, right? And sort of academically. I mean, braiding sweetgrass. She does an entire chapter where she talks about it. It's one of those things. I mean, it's one of those things that it's the Iroquois Thanksgiving address. But until I learned it in the language, for me, learning in the language became a seismic moment, right? It was a tectonic moment where suddenly, not only did it all make sense, it replaced my daily meditations. So if you want to go out and just take those 5 minutes, beginning of the day, end of the day, whenever, that's totally acceptable. Don't be afraid to use these words to connect with creation, because that's what they're there for. So let me back out a second, right? Because I realized, so Iroquois is it's the colonizer's word for us, right? It's a Huron word, it's a Wendat word. It comes from the word Iroquois, which means bad people, they're snakes. So if you look at sort of the names of the nations, right? Iroquois comes from, some French missionary being like, who are they? And the Huron being like, Iroquois, which the French turned into Iroquois. But then the two nations that are on the outside of the Confederacy, the Mohawk and the Seneca, right? The Mohawk we don't call ourselves Mohawk. Mohawk is actually Algonquin, and it means, depending on who you talk to, it means they eat meat or they eat people. Now, there is a little bit of history of cannibalism within the Confederacy that comes into the story of the Great Peace. And then the Seneca, so the Mohawk, we call ourselves Kanien'kehá, which means people of the flint. And then Seneca, I can never remember the name for the Seneca in their own language, because the further you get away from Kanien'kehá, like typically Mohawk 1 accent per word. By the time you get to Seneca, you can have 4 or 5 accents per word. So the language, which we're pretty sure starts as Mohawk and then goes west. By the time, and they've also, like the Seneca during the Beaver Wars, pushed out and took in so many other tribes that they've got so much other language in them. But they don't call themselves, well, they didn't call themselves Seneca. Call themselves Seneca now. So if you hear someone talking about the Haudenosaunee or the Haudenosaunee, so Haudenosaunee is how you would say it in Onondaga, which is they're the fire keepers, they're the center. Like Tadadaho is always Onondaga. So like for purposes of outward facing, Haudenosaunee, Haudensaunee, Haudenosaunee. Except in Kanien'kehá, it's Haudenosaunee. Rotision. Yeah, Haudenosaunee. So that's a little bit about names. And what Haudenosaunee or Haudenosaunee means literally is they built a long house. And that is the whole structure. So before I get into the Kaianerkó, right, let's swing back to the Karihwatehkwen. And if anyone's got a question or thoughts, this would be the perfect time. Because once I get into Kaianerkó, it's pretty meaty. So if anyone's got questions about Karihwatehkwen, this would be the time to questions, comments, thoughts. This would be the time to do it. Okay. Well, this is being recorded, right? So the joy of recording. So what we can do is we can do this. We can do the shortened version. And you can go back and listen to this. So I'm not gonna, I could do the Gunchokwa, say what don't see us go. You gotta wesa ne gati. Detsi do anura Detsi do Detsi do nuarad ne songwaya dison. Ne wahi rosa año o guego gina hora deo tu wari neji yohanjade. So we're thanking the creator who's given us Yohanjade is earth. So deo te nuarad ne ungwe su'a. And then if you were doing this, then it's ete ni Mohawk ne ongwa ni gora. So deo te nuarad ne yeti ni stongha ji yuhunjade. Deo te nuarad ne oneka su'a. Deo te nuarad ne gunjun su'a. Deo te nuarad ne ohunde su'a. Deo te nuarad ne odera su'a. Deo te nuarad ne ononhkwa'shon su'a. Deo te nuarad ne johekwa. Deo te nuarad ne ga'i su'a. Deo te nuarad ne ojinunwa su'a. Deo te nuarad ne gorondo su'a. Dahno oguere su'a. Deo te nuarad ne gondirio. Deo te nuarad ne ojideno ku'a. Deo te nuarad ne gayeri nigarawage. Deo te nuarad ne radiviras. Deo te nuarad ne Kaianerkó garakwa. Deo te nu. So that, and actually that would be a detsi doa nuaradne. Detsi doa nuaradne. So it's a masculine. Kaianerkó garakwa. And back to Deo te nuaradne. Yeti sota ahsen Kaianerkó garakwa. Deo te nuaradne oji stokwa su'a. Detsi doa nuaradne songwaya disa. That's ni dohonk ni ongwa ni gora to ni awanake. That's all I have to say. So there will not be a test on this. But if you want to go back and listen to it, like I said, also, if you want, I can do a recording of the simple version. So if you want to learn the words and say it, but also if you just want to do it in English, it's fine too. Any other questions before we launch into Kaianerkó? Does anyone here actually know the story of Hiawatha? Well, Bailey does because, well, he's my friend. All right, Rosie does. Okay. So, in our grandfather's time, that's how we frame it. The people, ononhkwa'shon, had wandered from the Creator. We had forgotten the four sacred rituals. People had forgotten to do Karihwatehkwen and had descended into war. Right? And we're talking 1,200 years ago. And there was conflict between the five nations, between the Seneca and the Cayuga, and the Mohawk and the Oneida, and the Ononhkwa'shon in the middle. And there's this state of constant warfare. And not only is there constant warfare, but things have gotten bad. Like there's cannibalism. And that's whether there's actual cannibalism, but it's in the story, is we had become cannibals. And that's sort of as far as you can go, right? As ononhkwa'shon is like, if you sank to the level where you're actually eating other people, that is not good. So there are these four beings who the Creator sends to Earth when people go astray, right? So as Haudenosaunee, we actually believe, like, you could look at it, and Buddha was one of these four beings. Jesus, I mean, the various prophets, right? Like in our belief system, there are these four beings, and when things start to go astray, the Creator sends one of them to kind of bring it back into line. And so one of these beings is sent to the Huron, which are traditionally like not allies of the Haudenosaunee, to an unwed mother, right? So mom and daughter are living outside of a village on their own, and woman has a child, and grandma is super suspicious, right? Because where'd this baby come from? No father. Like, did something happen and she didn't tell me? So grandma, being afraid that this child is going to bring dishonor and this child is evil, tries to drown the baby. She throws him in a lake. And she gets back to her longhouse, and there's the child sitting by the fire. And she leaves him out in the snow. And she comes back, there he is. And the third time she's going out, she's actually hacking a hole in the ice to dump the baby into the frozen lake. And the Creator comes to her and says, you gotta stop. Like, this baby has a purpose. I sent the baby. You can relax. So at that point, grandma's like, okay. And as the child gets older, he starts speaking of the good mind and the peace and the message. And he passes it to his own people. But that's not where he needs to be. So he carves a canoe out of white stone, and he paddles it across the lake. And actually, Kanien'kehá, there's a formation there that's white stone. It really kind of looks like somebody carved a canoe out of it. And he paddles across the lake. It's Lake Ontario, and comes to the lands of what will become the Haudenosaunee. And the first person he encounters is a cannibal. And the Peacemaker, not quite sure what to do with this. And Peacemaker sort of watches from a distance as this cannibal takes lunch into his cave, into his hut. Gets a cauldron going. And Peacemaker crawls up on top where he's peering in through the top hole. And the cannibal looks into the cauldron and sees this beautiful face. It's not his face, and so he's sort of for a moment broken free. And the Peacemaker comes in and introduces himself, and they bury the cannibal's dinner without eating it. And then the Peacemaker and the cannibal go out and they hunt a deer. And they save the antlers. And this becomes important later on because the antlers become a symbol of power within the Haudenosaunee. So that's the first convert. And there are some versions of the Kaianerkó where they say it's just some cannibal. There are other versions that say it's Hiawatha. I tend to just go with cannibal, and Hiawatha comes in later because that's the version I was taught. But I mean, Hiawatha is a Mohawk chief. Now, at that time, there's a warlord of the Onondaga named Tadadaho. Now, Tadadaho is a warlord. He's a chief, but he's also a wizard who has the ability to control the wind. He can talk to animals. That is Tadadaho's power. And the rest of the nation sort of live in fear of him. Now, Hiawatha, links up with the Peacemaker. And the Peacemaker says, I can help you, but, this is probably going to cost you. And within a year, Hiawatha's daughters were all dead. Mysteriously killed by Tadadaho. And Hiawatha's wife gets trampled to death. An eagle flies low over Hiawatha's village, and all the warriors are clamoring to get feathers, and she's coming back from getting water, and she gets trampled to death. So in the space of a year, Hiawatha loses his wife and his children, ostensibly at the hands of Tadadaho. And he leaves the companionship of people. He abandons the good mind. He abandons the words of power. He just abandons the great peace. And he goes out into the wilderness. And he wanders. And he's lost in his own grief. And really, nobody can blame him. There are other members of his tribe who try and keep him in, but he's lost everything. And the Peacemaker is nowhere to be seen. Hiawatha wanders out, and he comes to the shore of a lake where all these ducks are swimming along, and the ducks fly off, taking the lake with them, taking the water with them. So, because it's, this is a magical story. And the bottom of the lake, Hiawatha sees these white shells, these white whelk shells, and he picks them up, and they're pure. And he puts them to his ears, and to his eyes, and to his throat. And that becomes what we call the condolence ceremony, right? So in that moment, two things are created for the Haudenosaunee, right? The whelks become a critical part of what becomes known as wampum, right? That's how we record our history. And the condolence ceremony created by Hiawatha right there on the shores of that lake to this day is still done. You know, if you've had a death in your family, if you've been out in the world and you're coming back to the tribe, you want to be condoled. Three strands of wampum, touch to the ears, the eyes, the mouth, opens up your ears so you can hear the piece, clears your eyes so you can see the piece, clears your throat so you can speak the piece. So Hiawatha is a condoled person, he's a condoled man, and goes back and links back up to the Peacemaker. And they spend the next couple of years going through the various nations. And the Oneida sign on. Well, first actually they go to the Mohawk. They go to the Kanien'kehá, and they're a little suspicious. You know, they you know, the Peacemaker and Hiawatha, they're sticking to protocol, which is you come to the outskirts of the forest, you build a fire, and you wait for the people from the village to come to you. You say that you're there by building a fire, but you don't go in any further. The Mohawk come and they talk to the Peacemaker and they talk to Hiawatha. And Hiawatha is like, no, guys, he's on the level. But they're like, we're not sure. And so there's what is now known as the Falls at Cohoes, which is just north of Albany, New York. It's waterfall there. And they say, listen, we're going to go to this waterfall and we're going to put you in a tree and we're going to cut down the tree. And if you survive, we're ready to believe you. And so they do. They take the Peacemaker out to the Falls of Cohoes, climbs up a tree, a bunch of warriors cut down the tree, into the falls it goes. Everyone just kind of sits around, and the next morning they see smoke from the forests, and they go and, you know, there's a Peacemaker sitting there. So now the Mohawks are converts. And they go to the Oneida. And you can see sort of where this is building. Now, there is another person of import who comes into the story named Jigonsase. Now, she is a powerful woman who has her own longhouse that is on the main Haudenosaunee road, right? Little known fact, the New York State Thruway actually follows the path of the old Haudenosaunee road. So somewhere along what is now the New York State Thruway, Jigonsase has a longhouse where she's been stockpiling corn. And as various warring factions go by, she sells them the corn. She's been profiteering off of the war. And the Peacemaker and Hiawatha come to her and they say, it's not really a good thing that you're doing. How can we get you to stop? And Jigonsase she's not really interested in stopping. But they sit down and they share them. And in Haudenosaunee culture, you share a meal with someone, you're now related. Like we're all related anyway, right? We're all my relations. But when you share a meal, it's that longhouse thing. You're all in the same longhouse. And the Peacemaker and Jigonsase speak for days, and finally, the Peacemaker opens Jigonsase's eyes. Jigonsase agrees to stop feeding the warriors, and agrees that when the warriors come in, she'll sit them down, and they can all share a meal. Sneaking in Seneca and Cayuga at the same time and making sure they all eat together. Now they can't fight. So the Seneca sign on, the Cayuga sign on. But now we've got Tadadaho. And Tadadaho is, Tadadaho's not a fan of any of this. The story is his body is bent in 7 places, and he has snakes for hair. Technically, Hiawatha means he who combs hair. So they go the first time, and they're attacked by eagles. So they turn back. And then they go and they get on their canoes, and they decide to canoe across Onondaga Lake. And Tadadaho calls up a mighty wind. Their canoes are bashed around, and they turn around. And then the Peacemaker teaches them all the peace song. And so the Peacemaker and all of the chiefs in Hiawatha, they all walk into Onondaga country singing the peace song, which gives them protection against Tadadaho's power. And then they get to Tadadaho, and they begin the negotiation. And as you can sort of imagine, Tadadaho, the powerful warlord, has no real interest in joining a peace confederacy. Where's the profit and the fun in that? But eventually, the Peacemaker and Jigonsase and Hiawatha convince Tadadaho. And the way that the Peacemaker got Jigonsase to come, knowing that having both a man and a woman there would help sway Tadadaho, was the Peacemaker said to Jigonsase, "You can choose the chief. We will make you clan mother, and you can choose the chief of all chiefs." So Jigonsase and Hiawatha and the Peacemaker are talking to Tadadaho, and Jigonsase says, "If you accept the peace, if you clear your throat and open your eyes and open your ears, we will make you chief of chiefs. We will set the council fire here in Onondaga." And so Tadadaho thinks that that's a pretty good deal. So Tadadaho relents. Hiawatha combs the snakes from his hair, as his ears are unplugged and his eyes are opened and his throat is opened. We say his body was unbent. Body was straightened as he really received the good mind. And then Jigonsase places those the antlers of power onto Tadadaho. And interestingly enough, the current Tadadaho is a guy named Sid Hill. It is a hereditary title now. So the chief of chiefs of the Haudenosaunee is still called Tadadaho. Like I said, the current Tadadaho is a guy named Sid Hill, who's Onondaga. Tadadaho always has to be Onondaga. And so that's when the Confederacy is really born, at that moment. And it's said that under a total eclipse of the sun, the Peacemaker uproots this great white pine tree. And all of the chiefs and all of the warriors put their weapons underneath this tree, literally burying the hatchet. And the tree is stood back up, and there are roots, major roots, called the roots of peace, north, east, south, west. And at the top of the tree of peace is Agwek, the eagle, who watches out and in time of trouble will call out and warn the Haudenosaunee. So there it is. There's the 5 nations, and every chief brings a strand of sealant, of wampum, and they're all woven together. And thus the Hiawatha belt is born. On Facebook, when they posted the 10-minute warning for this class, that's what was used, was a Hiawatha belt. And if you've seen it, it's a purple field with a white line running through it. With some people say it's an arrowhead in the center. No, it's a pine tree. So it's 2 boxes on either side and a pine tree. And that represents the 5 nations, the Seneca, Cayuga, Onondaga, Oneida, and Mohawk. But, you know, the reservation in Sweden now is 6 nations because it's now the 6 nations. Because that's the way Kaianerkó is built. It's a gift from the Creator brought to us by the Peacemaker. And it's a way of being that can be expanded. So, you know, the Tuscarora flee their lands in the 18th century, make their way up to New York, and ask the council and Onondaga to admit them. And now you've got the 6 nations. If there were other nations, I mean, ostensibly, right, the United States government could say, we realize we've been doing this thing entirely wrong. And after nearly 250 years, we've kind of made a botch job of it. We'd like to come to the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, to the Council Fire, and be brought under the Great Peace, and be the 7th nation of the Haudenosaunee Confederacy. Technically, Kaianerkó is built that way, so you can bring it in. This is why I don't have a problem with people who are not Haudenosaunee doing the Thanksgiving address, right? Because it's not a religion in the way you know sort of most people put religion. You know, you'll hear people talk about, oh, you know, I'm Longhouse. I'm traditional Longhouse. You know, it's a way of being. It's not necessarily a religious structure. It's certainly not structured. You know, it's not formula. I mean, you know, I said you can hear 6 people who do Karihwatehkwen and hear 6 different versions. Are there parts of Kaianerkó that, you know, are absolutely, you know, they're law? It's the Constitution. It's a 1,000-year-old democracy. That's the thing about the Haudenosaunee, is Kaianerkó, the Peacemaker creates that day by weaving those wampum belts together. Creates here's your 8th grade civics class, creates a tricameral system. So you have the executive in Taradaho, right? You have the legislative body, which are the chiefs, the hereditary chiefs. Although the title is hereditary, not the position. And then you've got the clan mothers, who are sort of the judicial. The clan mothers can appoint the chiefs, but the clan mothers also have the power to remove the chiefs at any time if they think they're not fulfilling their duty. You know, there's a lot of talk in modern society in America about how the founders, the framers of the Constitution, I mean, Ben Franklin came up and heard a Haudenosaunee man speak in 1745. And there's a lot of sort of discussion about how the United States Constitution is based on, you know, the Great Law of Peace. Except that, and yes, there are parts of it, but some of the major things were left out, like women have an equal say in the law. I mean, clan mothers. I mean, Haudenosaunee society is matrilineal. The reason I'm Bear Clan Wakskariwage is because my line tracks to my father. Which technically means I sit with the bears in the longhouse, but until I'm adopted into, like, I could be adopted into any clan, but technically I'm clanless right now. But I sit with the bears in the longhouse because I track through the father's line. So it's a matrilineal society that has at its very core belief this, you know, the Karihwatehkwen, this intrinsic respect for nature. and for where we are in the world. And that was just kind of left out of the United States Constitution. Like they took the tricameral thing. And that's what I think that's what like people like to reference is, oh, the tricameral thing. That was from the Iroquois Constitution. Well, it is, but they dropped the ball on the whole women thing and nature thing. That's neither here nor there. So that's the basic. So when you read Kaianerkó or you hear Kaianerkó always starts by talking about that always starts by talking about how the Kaianerkó came to be. So you can't just, it's not a law document. You can't just like open it up to Article 7, subsection 2. When you do Kaianerkó, you have to talk about the Peacemaker and Hiawatha and Tadadaho and Jagonsace and you have to understand how the Great Peace came to be before you can even talk about the Great Peace. If you are interested, there is there's a written, this is probably the best version of Kaianerkó you can find. The author is a guy named Paul Williams. This is from the University of Manitoba Press. It was pretty easy to find last year. It's nearly impossible to find now, but I can drop the ISBN into our materials thing later if you're really interested. He's a Kanien'kehá lawyer. So it kind of reads like a law text in places, but it's got the whole thing, including all the parts of Kaianerkó, the creation and the actual bits of the law. So that's a lot in a short time span. So I see that that Otto mentioned that the Lakota are matriarchal. Yeah, I think a lot of the indigenous cultures in North America are matriarchal or matrilineal at least. I don't know. Is anybody else from another nation who can chime in? I think the the Dene are matrilineal as well. Although they tend to mention both of their parents. So yeah. But at this point we're gonna take a minute and I'm gonna open it up to questions because that was a lot. So are there any questions? No. Either I'm doing a really good job of explaining things or you guys are all bored out of your minds.
I know I'm not bored. I'm just kind of marinating in all of the information right now. Yeah, like Benedict says, my brain is full. So I'm just kind of like chewing on it a little bit, as far as, the pronunciation and the diction and the dialect rules that you mentioned earlier, as far as, how to actually say the words, what the words mean, and then what the words like capital letter mean.
Yeah.
So.
Lily?
So based on kind of the way that the law of peace came about, are all of the nations considered equal?
Okay. That's a really good question. So the Onondaga are the keepers of the council fire, right? So they're the final adjudicators in council. Because that's who Chief of Chiefs is. Tadadaho Onondaga. The Seneca are the keepers of the western door. The Kanien'kehá, the Mohawk, are keepers of the eastern door. So in Longhouse, you're actually laid out like you are laid out geographically. So Oneida is between Mohawk and Onondaga, and Cayuga is between Seneca and Onondaga. And the Mohawks are referred to as the Mohawks and the Senecas are referred to as the older brothers. And the Cayuga and Oneida are referred to as the younger brothers. And the way that Longhouse functions is the older brothers have the right to bring in first things to be discussed. And then they discuss it amongst themselves and they pass. So the Mohawk and the Seneca talk. And then they'll pass it to the Oneida and the Cayuga, and they'll talk. And they can either pass it back to the Seneca and the Mohawk, or then they can pass it to Onondaga. So, like, you know, great example. A couple years ago, there was a whole discussion about casinos. And in traditional Longhouse, you know, that's not seen as a good thing. And actually, you ended up with a split. You've ended up in a split within the Haudenosaunee on the casino / tobacco thing. But in traditional Longhouse, you know, there were the people came in and they said, we want to have casinos. And the supporters of the casinos and the Mohawks and the Senecas were super jazzed. And they passed it to Oneida and Cayuga, and the Oneida and Cayuga were like, oh, we don't actually think we want to do this. But there were some Oneida who were like, well, that might not be a bad idea. But so traditionally, they passed it around. And in traditional Longhouse, the decision was, yeah, not so much. But like anything, right? So you've got the traditional government, and then you've got the federal government, the federally recognized chiefs. And so that's how you ended up with casinos in Anglo-Saxon and casinos in Seneca and casinos in Oneida, is because you had this split between the traditional and the modern. But the traditional had sort of passed it around and had debated it, and it was a big debate that ended up with, you know, let's not go that way. Then, you know, but the thing is right, like, so John Mohawk, who was a Seneca, because that's not confusing, he talks about the rock hard place, right? So, like, you start council with the Karihwatehkwen, right? Because that's something you can all agree on. You can all agree that Mother Earth is great. You can all agree that fish are cool. Like, you can all agree on these 19 things, minimum. Like, yeah, there it is. And then you bring in the easy things to discuss. And you're building consensus, and you're building a conversation with each other, right? So the Onondaga have the ability to toss the conversation back, but, you know, the Oneida and the Cayuga and the Seneca and the Mohawk, they're all moving within each other. They're all talking within each other. And that's like, it's kind of like what the Dutch call polderen, you know, like everybody gets their voices heard. Except in polderen in the Netherlands, like, they sort of joke that nobody gets everything and everybody gets something and nobody leaves really happy. But so, like, in Longhouse, it's not quite that sort of stark. You start with the simple things, you pass the simple things around, and then you get to that rock hard place. You get to those hard issues. And by then, you've remembered how to talk to each other. You've remembered how to discuss. And while you do, like, while there are, you know, older brother, younger brother, and Onondaga has the final say, everybody gets their voices heard. The clan mothers, the chiefs, everybody gets their voices heard. So, you know, we have these titles from older, younger brother, but at the end of the day, really, like, all of the nations, and we've added the third younger brother now is Tuscarora, right? but we've added these nations. But it's everyone gets their voice heard. Everyone is equal. Everyone is sharing. Because remember, this is like you're in a longhouse, and if you've ever been in a Haudenosaunee longhouse, I mean, it's or any kind of longhouse, it's just a straight hallway. Typically, there would be bunks against the wall. And if you were in a familial longhouse, the family would sleep on the bottom bunks and storage would be above, and family groups would share a fire. And it's sort of the same thing in council longhouse. Is literally the Seneca are on the west end, and Mohawk are on the east end, and the Onondaga are sitting right in the middle, and the Oneida are between the Onondaga and the Mohawk, and the Cayuga are between the Onondaga and the Seneca. And now the Tuscarora, where do they sit? I think they actually sit around the Onondaga, but it's a structural thing where, yes, you're all kind of pulling out from the central fire, but it's designed so that everyone can be heard, and everyone gets their voice, everyone gets their time and their voice. And the law is, right, if you can't agree, if you discuss something and it's a rock hard thing, and it goes from the older brother to the younger brother, to the older brother, to the younger brother, to Onondaga, back to the younger brother, back to Onondaga, back to the older brother. And you get to the point where you realize you've been arguing the thing for a week, and there's no way that it's just gonna be a thing. It's just gonna be, we're not gonna agree on this. You agree that you're not gonna agree. And the topic is left on the table. But you are stipulated by the peace. That's it. Like, you walk out of council, you can't be arguing. You walk out of council, you go have a meal with the people you were just in council with. You re-energize the bond of family. And I mean, and then the thing is, like, within Haudenosaunee culture, we've got clans. If I'm Mohawk Bear Clan and I meet a really cute Cayuga Bear Clan woman, I can't marry her, even though she's Cayuga. Technically, by our clan system, I couldn't marry anyone who was Bear Clan from any nation in Turtle Island. So you've got these clan connections, you've got nation connections, and their clans. Like, we've got turtle and wolf and bear. You'll find those in the other Haudenosaunee nations, but they add on things like eel and snipe and otter, deer. So you get clans, you've got the nations, but at the end of the day, it's once you've reached a point where you can't agree, you just leave it on the table. You just walk away from it. Fun factoid. The first time that the Great Peace was significantly broken was actually during the American War for Independence at the Battle of Oriskany, where Mohawk and Seneca, who were allied with the British, went up against Oneida and Tuscarora, who had allied with the Patriots, with the Americans. So nearly 800 years of uninterrupted peace between the five nations was broken because of outside influence. And it is said that the council fire was extinguished after the Sullivan campaign in 1779, when the Haudenosaunee fled to Canada. If you ever want to really despise our country some more, read General Washington's orders to General Sullivan for the launching of the campaign against the Haudenosaunee, because it's a flat-out genocide. 49 villages burned in the late summer and fall, with their directions to kill every Indian, kill or capture every Indian, depending on, regardless of age or sex, and destroy all their seed crop and destroy all their food. So, yeah. But to this day, I mean, it's like I said, I mean, if strangely enough, the United States government came to the Haudenosaunee and were like, yeah, we've seen the error of our ways, and we think the Peacemaker was right. There would be a really long discussion in council. It would probably last 5 or 6 years. It might be one of those decisions that could never be made. But technically, by the way the Great Law is written, you know, the United States could be brought under the Great Law. Yeah. Okay. I'm gonna stop there for a second, because my God, clearly this is something I can talk about. Are there any other questions? And it doesn't necessarily have to be on Kaianerkó or Karihwatehkwen. You know, if you got other cultural questions, thoughts, queries, intellectual itches you would like to scratch. I know we have at least one linguist in here. Fun facts, Kanien'kehá is comprised of 90% verbs. So Mohawk language is 90% verbs, 7% nouns, and 3% particles. And the action is more important when forming the sentence than the person who's actually doing the action. So we like to talk about how the language paints a picture for the listener, right? So when you're speaking, you're using the words to create an image for whoever's listening. And then the words are built out of pieces. That once you understand the pieces, it becomes a pretty easy language to understand. So like I think Rosie, you were saying you wanted to learn Kanien'kehá. It's a language that there's an institute in Oswego that does what they call the root method, the root word method. So like a fun word to say is the word for I'm ready. Wagadariwe-anada. So Wagadariwe-anada. How do we break that down? So waga is, so every verb is broken into a prefix and an ending and a root, minimum, 3 pieces. Waga is the prefix for I to it, for a C stem, or a stem, for an A stem word. So waga is I to it. Adare is the reflexive infix, not a suffix, not a prefix, but an infix, which brings it back to itself. So I to it, back to myself. We'anada. So we'anada is to make ready or to prepare, and is the definite ending. So I to it, back to myself, have made ready definitely. I'm ready. Wagadari we'anada. So like I didn't realize I didn't think we were gonna get into Kanien'kehá linguistics, but there's a little bit of interest. So especially if you're trying to digest the words of like ononhkwa'shon, having a little bit of understanding of how the language is. And you'll notice we use diacritics. So lots of accents. Actually, there are 3 accents. There's a short accent, a long accent, and a falling tone. And then you'll get what we call colons, or apostrophes are glottals. They're either breaths or glottals. So yeah, if you look, and this is where I say, you know, Mohawk has one accent per word. Seneca can have four. Yeah, that's the, like, if you look at Ohandun Karihwatehkwen, right? It's you've got and it's usually, the accent is usually on the second to last vowel. So like that's helpful. So as you know, it's sort of, and it's a polysynthetic language. So as you sort of pile things together, the accent moves down the line. So like, you know, if you want to say thank you, it's Niawe, Niawen, and the A has an accent. There's a colon in the middle of it. But if you want to say thanks a lot, right? Goa, like Kaianerkó, Niawe, no accents, apostrophe KO. The O has the lengthened, the long stress, colon WA. So Kaianerkó. So Yamagoa is thanks a lot. Kaianerkó, great peace. Goa means great or a lot. So actually, one of our greetings is Skanagoa. Skanagoa is literally great peace. Because Kaianerkó is great law of peace, but Skana is the word for peace. So Skanagoa is great peace. So Skanagoa is literally, it's, are you great peace? But what it really means is like, do you have the great peace? Are you carrying the great peace? Are you a member of the Haudenosaunee Confederacy? Do you have the great peace? You could also say it's like, are you at peace? So if somebody said it's gonna go, you'd say, it's gonna go. The confusing part about Mohawk is the way you say yes is and the way you say no is yeah. So if you're an English speaker, yeah, are reversed. So, but yeah, like we actually, it is culturally in the language. You greet somebody, it's gonna go. You create a great peace. You know, and later on, like, so in the 18th century, there's a guy who comes along, who's a half brother to Red Jacket. He's Seneca, right? So he's not Mohawk, he's Seneca. And he, the story is he gets lost in the booze, and he's really sick, and he's visited by these four beings from the Creator, and they bring him a message. And it's another one of those, the people have lost their way moments. And that message is what is now called the Code of Handsome Lake. And so he sits down and he writes this fairly, like, if you look at it, it's definitely influenced by Europe, by European thinking, because you've got the Kaianerkó, which is sort of very natural and flowing, and then you've got the Code of Handsome Lake, which is like, and step 37, you won't stop gossiping, stop drinking. There are all these points to the Code of Handsome Lake. So you can definitely tell it's been influenced by Europe and the Quakers, because there's been a lot of Quaker influence out into the Seneca at that point. So yeah, and actually you'll hear people talking about, in modern Haudenosaunee communities, sometimes when they're talking about longhouse, they're talking about Code of Handsome Lake. So, yeah. Other questions? I mean, I realize we're sort of down to the diehards here. You know, let's ask a Mohawk. So, yeah, I am open to questions. I have been talking for an hour and a half, and I am absolutely open to questions. I realize people's brains are full, and that's awesome. And I am really thankful that you guys came here to learn. Like, your curiosity about our words is a gift, right? So that's a gift to me. Am I a linguist? Am I a linguist? I love languages. I am not a trained.
Yes.
Okay, yes. Annalita says I'm a linguist.
You are totally a linguist. Don't even start with that nonsense. How many languages do you already have? So you can start there.
Yeah, okay. So yeah, Kanien'kehá is language 7. Although a couple of them are just, operating languages. Like, I can get into trouble on construction sites and I can order dinner in French. But no, I speak German, Dutch, and Russian fairly fluently. And for a lark, I learned Old Kingdom Egyptian hieroglyphics, because why not? At least the basics. So, but yeah, so like you've got someone here who can answer your questions, and I appreciate you guys coming and learning.
Estgar, if you scroll up in the chat above Rosie's comment, there is kind of like a 2-part question.
Okay. All right, so that's a great question. What drew me to the SCA? Because I've been in the SCA for years. Now this is my 25th year in the society, and I mean, to be honest, I grew up in a household where we did not talk about our native side. The last member of my family to speak, as far as I understand, was my great-grandmother. My uncle taught me a few words when I was a kid. But we were raised staunch New Englanders, proud of our Scottish heritage, but also steeped in history. So, and when I was a teenager, I did Revolutionary War reenactment. And then, I found out about the SCA, and actually I found out about the SCA in like 1990, 1989, but pre-internet, couldn't find it. Found it my first week of college, and I joined because history. And I've had a couple personas over the years. But then I started seeing more interest in New World stuff, right? So my main persona is an 8th century Saxon, Estgar. And it's like, there's a lot of focus, as far as I can tell, in New World studies on the Aztec, Maya, Inca. I mean, these are places that had a rich physical material culture, right? And not saying that the Haudenosaunee didn't have a rich material culture, but didn't build out of stone. Didn't, metalworking, not so much. I mean, yes, but not to the level of Aztec Empire. So as I started seeing more and more people coming to discuss the New World, I started seeing people asking things about Haudenosaunee, right? Because it's one of those cultures that Europeans experience fairly early on, But because it's one of those cultures that Europeans experienced fairly early on, it gets pushed out. I mean, you can go to Dineta, you can go to Navajo country, and they're still in the same villages they've been in for 2,000 years. Like, most of the Haudenosaunee are living, in places that were not their traditional lands. So the Mesoamerican cultures had a lot of contact for that first 100 years. That is true. I mean, there was contact. There's this sort of image that, like, North America's discovered, and the conquest of Mexico happens, and the conquest of the Incan Empire, but that nothing's really happening in North America. Well, that's not true. You've got plenty of explorers who are going up and down the American coastline. So it's not like when the Dutch sailed up the Hudson River, when Henry Hudson sailed up the Hudson River the North River in 1609, that the Lenape and the Haudenosaunee and the Mohawk people had no idea who these people were, because we have to remember that America was a vast connected network of trade networks and nations. But that interestingly, that century of contact is not a really positive century for Native America. There are 100 million Native Americans North and South America prior to contact. And by 1600, that number is down to about 12. About 90% of Native America dies in the first 100 to 150 years. Yeah, I mean, we know for a fact now that the number that a group of scientists settled on was 56 million, because that's the amount of land that went back into forest. But to get back to the original question, so why am I bringing this to? Because people are asking about the Haudenosaunee, right? And I know that for years I read about my ancestors, right? I read about the Haudenosaunee, but until you actually talk to someone, until you actually start to get those cultural connections, it's not as vibrant, right? Like, language is such a vehicle for Native stories, for Native traditions. And, right, if somebody wants to do a Haudenosaunee persona, right? So we've got the 4 Mohawk kings who were brought over very early on, early 17th century. So there is some representation, pretty close to period. But a lot of the culture hasn't changed all that much. The Kaianerkó, Karihwatehkwen, those are all still there, right? And so if I want to help someone who's not Haudenosaunee do a respectful Haudenosaunee persona, right? Then I gotta come and teach these classes. And the off side of that is also like, yeah, I'm helping modern people think more like ononhkwa'shon, so that's a bonus. But really, like, I mean, people come and they ask about Haudenosaunee things, and for most people, like, what you learn about the Iroquois, if you go to school in New York State, you probably get a couple months about indigenous people. If you went to school anywhere else, you might have read about the Iroquois as in a paragraph. And there's some great books out there, but unless you know where to find them. Okay, yeah, doesn't surprise me. You got a bit Michigan. Oddly enough, little known facts. During the Beaver Wars, the Haudenosaunee stretched their control as far west as Michigan. So there were battles fought during the Beaver Wars between the Haudenosaunee and other tribes in Michigan and Wisconsin. And technically for a brief time, parts of Michigan were under control of the Haudenosaunee, were brought into the peace. So doesn't surprise me that people taught there in Michigan. But that's why I'm teaching this. Like, that's why I'm teaching this class. I mean, I sort of toyed with the idea of doing a Kanien'kehá persona. Yeah, it doesn't surprise me. I mean, it's you know, so there's just not a lot of information out there being taught about the Haudenosaunee. So I figured I'd come here, and you know, there would be people interested, and I could sit here and talk, and teach you about these two things that are really, they're really, you know, kind of seminal. And if you can sort of understand, you know, I mean, if you really want to go to deep dive and, you know, get a copy of Kaianerkó, like, that would be awesome. If you're interested, like Tom Porter, Grandma said, he's the chief of Kanien'kehá, friend of mine. It's a very good book. Basically what they did was they followed him around for a couple of years and just recorded him, because he doesn't write English very well. So it's a great way to understand, to get a better handle on it. But you know, I would love to see more New World personas in the society. And I think that and there is a lot of worry, right? That, like, where do you walk the line between honoring and appropriating? And I think if you're doing it, like, if you're doing it from a place of genuine interest, you know, that's totally cool. You know, it's not a Halloween costume, right? It's a persona. You are doing a deep dive research. And so, you know, if I start doing things like this and make these things accessible to Scadians, then maybe someone will do a Haudenosaunee persona, but we'll have been grounded on Karihwatehkwen and Kaianerkó. That's my whole point here. Yeah, so I see one of the chat notes is braiding sweetgrass is accessible. Yep, I have given braiding sweetgrass to numerous people. I think it's a really good way to begin looking at indigenous thinking, because that's really, like, that's what this is, right? This is indigenous. This is beginning to think indigenously. As my Kanien'kehá teacher likes to say, you know, after 3 hours of intensive language, you know, we're all sitting there with headaches. He goes, yeah, decolonizing is a painful process. Like, it should hurt. So, like, that's you know, that's, so, you know, I try and, you know, because the thing is, you can decolonize even if you're not ononhkwa'shon, like, just average Joe European, you know, Jane Western Europe or whatever. I mean, it's if you want to understand ononhkwa'shon, right, there are ways to do it. And braiding sweetgrass is a great way to get into it. Understanding Karihwatehkwen, like, I would love it if people around the world started to just think about giving thanks every day. Like, and not thanks for having a great job and having money and having a car. Like, let's take it back to basics. Like, thank you for the people and for Mother Earth. Like, thank you for the air. So I think we take a lot of this stuff for granted. So, yeah, there's some good questions here. Any other questions?
So since there aren't that many of us left now, I can go ahead and stop the recording now, and everyone can come off mute if they want to and turn on their video if they want to, if that would be okay.
Fine by me.
Okay, all right.